Hello, I'm Bry Willis. I'm a language philosopher and I publish speculative literary fiction as Ridley Park. I'm not entirely sure which persona I expect to employ today, so I'll let you decide. I'm going to try something new. I just started reading Stoner by John Williams, and I'd like to share my thoughts chapter by chapter as I read, but I don't want to spend a lot of time writing prepared notes, scripting everything, and then heavily editing it afterwards. Instead, I'd like this to be more spontaneous, a cumulative reading of the novel as I encounter it. That distinction's important here because I don't yet know where the novel's going. I may form impressions now that later events complicate, undermine, or completely subvert. If this happens, I'm not going to go back and quietly repair my earlier interpretation. I'll stand corrected when the time comes. Before I begin, a spoiler warning. There will be spoilers up to and including the chapters I'm discussing. I'm not going to summarize every chapter in detail, but I can't really talk about what interests me without revealing plot and character details. I won't knowingly spoil anything beyond the point which I've reached in the novel. So, with that out of the way, who is William Stoner? From the marketing material, and this bit is prepared, William Stoner is born at the end of the 19th century into a dirt-poor Missouri farming family. And in the novel, we follow Stoner as circumstances gradually seem to construct a life around him. At least that's my impression after the first two chapters. Stoner strikes me as effectively passive. He reminds me somewhat of Meursault and Camus L'Étranger, but there's an important difference. Meursault seems largely uninterested in interpreting events through the emotional vocabulary that everyone around him expects. Things happen. Other people insist that these things ought to mean something. Meursault seems rather puzzled by the whole enterprise. And Stoner is different. He seems to have more agency, or at least more awareness, but his introspection is delayed. He experiences something first and only later begins to understand what it might have meant to him. In that sense, Stoner may actually occupy the more uncomfortable position. Meursault's insouciance offers a particular kind of insulation. Stoner seems capable of recognizing what has happened to him, but often only after it has happened. So he's already made the decision and then reflects on it. Consider how his life begins to take shape. Stoner is the only son of a farming family. His father hears that William can attend the University of Missouri and study agriculture. The idea is practical enough. He can learn modern agricultural techniques and eventually bring that knowledge home to improve the farm. Stoner has no particular alternative in mind, so he goes. He doesn't fit particularly well into the university life, but after taking a literature course with Professor Archer Sloan, something changes. Literature affects him. But even here, Stoner doesn't immediately stand up and declare, "This is who I am. I shall devote my life to literature." In fact, Sloan seems to recognize what has happened before Stoner can even articulate it himself. Eventually, Stoner abandons agriculture for literature. Then as graduation approaches, Sloan tells him, in effect, that he should continue. He should pursue graduate study. He can earn a stipend by teaching, $400 a year. And Stoner accepts this new trajectory. So he starts as farmer, agricultural student, literature student, graduate student, teacher, again and again, or something seems to provide him with an available description, and Stoner inhabits it. That doesn't mean that he has no agency. Now, I'm not sure that I believe in agency very strongly or enough to make the claim about anybody, but he doesn't seem to construct identities so much as accept identities that become available to him. At graduation, Sloan tells him that he's a teacher, so Stoner becomes a teacher. Then in the second chapter, he faces what I think is his first conspicuously explicit decision. The U.S. enters the First World War. Stoner has made two friends during graduate school, a Gordon Finch and a David Masters, both decide to enlist. Finch will become an officer. Masters will be killed in France. I told you that there'd be spoilers. In any case, they expect Stoner to join them. For perhaps the first time, Stoner is presented with two competing versions of himself. He can become a soldier, as his friends do, or he can remain the teacher he has only recently learned to think of himself as being. He is genuinely torn. He speaks with Archer Sloan, whom I think we can reasonably call his mentor by this point. Sloan refuses to make the decision for him. He tells Stoner that the choice has to be his, but he also reminds him of something. Stoner is a teacher. After a couple of days, Stoner decides not to enlist. He remains at university. His friends suggest that he may someday regret this decision, but I think there's something interesting happening here because Finch and Masters initially appear much more active than Stoner. They make the dramatic choice and they enlist, so they go to war, but I'm not sure they're necessarily exercising more agency. They may simply be differently tethered. Their decision is embedded in ideas of duty, masculinity, friendship, patriotism, perhaps adventure, obligation. Stoner's decision is tethered to this newly acquired identity as a teacher instead. Different social vocabularies are presenting different answers to the question, what sort of person are you? And each of them responds accordingly. So I'm reluctant to frame this as active friends versus passive Stoner. It may instead be different people responding to different available constructions of themselves through their own saliences. Meanwhile, Stoner has to return home and reveal something else to his parents. He no longer sees himself as a farmer, and that creates a distance between them. Again, what interests me is that Stoner doesn't simply change jobs. A description of himself has changed. Farmer once organized his future almost completely. Now teacher does. And once that description changes, his relationship with his family changes with it. And after 2 chapters, my provisional reading of Stoner is something like this. William Stoner seems to become whatever the world successfully tells him he is, not mindlessly, not without feeling, and perhaps not even unwillingly, but experience seems to arrive first, identity second, and introspection rather later. That immediately puts me in mind of Camus, although I don't think Stoner is another Meursault. If anything, his greater awareness may leave him in a worse predicament. But that's where I am after 2 chapters. I may be completely wrong, and that is rather the point of doing this chapter by chapter. Anyway, so this is the end of this rant. We'll see what happens after the next chapter or 2. And if this is a place that you can like or subscribe, follow, or whatever, please do so. Comment if you'd like. If you've read this, let me know. If you have a different take on the character, let me know, or even the other characters or the story sort of more generally. Ciao.